Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Atenas and this is Mode Bespoke. Today's project is a requested tutorial for a liner for our honeycomb purse. So if you haven't seen this purse before, sorry if it's a little beaten up, I use this purse every day. But if you haven't seen the pattern for this purse, it is available on the blog. It is also available here on YouTube. And this is a Tunisian crochet purse in the honeycomb stitch. So look for that. I'll also link it at the end of this video so you can find it, and I'll put a link in the description box below. But this one, I made it a while back, and I made it in Tunisian crochet so that it was really tightly knit on the inside. However, I did get a request for a tutorial for how to make a liner for this purse. So let's get started with that. So let's get started here. For the liner, I'm just going to use some scraps. However, you can choose any kind of fabric that you want depending on the use that you are going to give the purse. So if you're going to make a day-to-day purse, you probably want a fabric that's really sturdy and that isn't going to, maybe doesn't have a lot of stretch. Like this is just the bottom part of a pair of jeans that I had. So this side stretches quite a bit. Fortunately for me, I'm going to use it this way. So I'm going to double it up like this. So in this direction, there is no stretch. So, and this is what I want for the inside of the purse because I'm going to fold it over so it comes up this way. And I don't want it to stretch too much down so it doesn't weigh down my purse. So as far as materials go, you can use any fabric you want. Again, I would go with something not so stretchy for the inside, but that's my preference, and maybe something a little thicker. So that's why I'm saying like a really thick cotton piece of fabric would work great, because then it doesn't really matter what you put in your purse, it'll last you a little bit longer. So I'm using these jeans that I just cut off the bottom of them. So here's the other side of the jeans. I went through and I cut all of these little edges off and just made sure that it was wide enough for my purse. So to do that, let's button this up real quick. I'm just going to lay my purse flat on whatever piece of fabric you are getting. So if you're going to use scraps, make sure that you have a little bit of extra space left over on the sides. So like here you can see this little bit, and here you can see this little bit. We're going to need this because this is where we're going to sew the edges. So we want it to line up with the purse. And since this fabric stretches this way, I'm not terribly worried that I won't have space to put any of my items in because it will stretch to the side. My primary concern is that it isn't going to stretch too much, although this purse has a tiny bit of stretch, so we should be okay with that. But we're going to line up our purse with our fabric. I will be cutting off this top part right here, so I'm going to give that some space as well, because here we have to fold the edge over and create a little hem, much like this one, although I don't know, maybe I will keep this just so I don't have to do it again. But we're going to fold this over like this, and then we're just going to stitch along the top. So we're going to need to leave that space there. And then just, if you're not quite sure how much space you need, just give it a quick fold like that and make sure that you have enough room to sew. So maybe like the thickness of your finger might work. And there we go. We still have a little space here to line up on the edge of our purse, just in case we need that little extra space. Now for the bottom part, line up your purse, and on the part that's the lowest, I use soap as a marker. You can use colored pencils, you can use anything you want really, but I normally when I sew, I just use a piece of like lighter soap, something that's white or maybe like a light cream color this way. Nothing dyed because it might stain your fabric. So what I use it for is I just line it up with my purse and I draw a line straight across. So, and then I use soap or chalk as well. I've used chalk a few times because when you wash your fabric, this will come right off. So that's what makes it nice when you use the soap. All right, so now we know that this is the bottom part of the liner. So this is going to be in the inside of the purse. Now what we need to do is fold another half that's the same as this. Now, if your fabric is not long enough for you to fold it over the way that I'm going to do this here, if you cannot fold your fabric over and still have some left like this, then you can still sew the bottom part. Just make sure that you have enough so that your purse fits, and you're going to measure it like we did up here at the top. So we're going to leave a little bit of space because we're going to fold this bottom part over so that it goes like this, and then we're going to give it a little bit of an edge here. So that way our edges won't fray like you see here. We don't want this on the inside of our purse. So that's why we're going to fold this over, and then we're going to sew it, and you won't have that problem. All right, so back to what we were measuring. I'm going to go here, and I'm going to fold my purse, or my fabric, excuse me, right on the line. So that's my soap line or chalk line or whatever you used. And then we're going to fold it like this. Now I know that up here I can cut right along the edge of this fabric because I've already measured this side of my fabric and I know that it fits my purse. I said I was going to cut this off, so I will, just so that I can show you how I'm going to do the edging. So I'm going to move this over just a bit. There we go, I just fold it over. And then using my soap or your chalk, whatever you're using as a marker, just draw another line right here. There you go. So I can see my line. I just grab a pair of scissors. If you have any kind of sewing scissors or some kitchen shears, any kind of scissors you want, just cut along here. So cut along your line. It's going to take me forever with these. So I have some kitchen shears handy. So let's just go through and cut this like so. Now this little bit we can use for a pocket if you want to, which I will show you how to make here in a minute in case you want something to put your cell phone in or whatever. So I'm going to leave that on the side. And then here I'll cut this part off. All right, so here's our fabric. We are ready to start sewing. So the request for this tutorial was to make it by hand so that you don't need to use a sewing machine. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. So we want all of this frayed stuff to be on the inside of our liner. This is gonna be the inside part that is gonna go in the purse. So basically what I'm gonna do here, I mean, I could do this in this other darker side if I wanted to as well, but I kind of want this to be on the inside. So I'm going to fold it, put it in my purse. See, and that's how it's going to work. So I didn't put it all the way in, but that's okay. So there we go. So that's how it's going to look. So this is going to be the inside part, and this is going to be the back side, okay? So we're going to take our edges and line everything up. Now, depending on the fabric you have, you might need to iron it at this point. If you have a cotton it's kind of wrinkled or anything, you might want to iron it. This will make this part a little bit easier. But if you don't need to, let's keep going. So I grabbed a needle and I've already threaded it. So I just got a dark blue, navy blue thread. And to make a knot, what my grandma taught me was just to wrap the thread around my finger and then just to twist my thumb and my index finger, and there we go, we have a nice little knot. So here we go, I'll cut this little bit of the thread that's left there, and we're ready to start sewing. So if you want to make this super perfect, I would use a couple of pins and maybe line up all of what you're going to sew. So line it up here along the sides. I don't need this to be perfect. It's for my own personal use, and it's going to be in the inside of my purse. So I'm just going to go ahead and just freehand it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start here at the base, so where my fold is, and I'm just going to give this a quick stitch. Like so. Go. And I'll I'll zoom in real quick so everybody can see. So just in and out. So I'll give it 2 or 3 because it is the bottom corner. And then I'll do the same when I sew the other side. So there we go. Now all I'm going to do is sew along. Here, I'll draw a little line. The edge. I do want to leave a little bit of an edge in here in case, you know, you pull on it and you tear maybe a seam or something, you'll be able to go through and fix it. Because if you do it right along the edge, chances are at some point, see how this is unraveling? At some point, all of this unraveling will reach your stitch and then your liner will tear open. So we don't really want that to happen. So I'll line these up and let's get sewing. So make sure that both sides line up. So if you have like this one that this side's a little bit wider than this side, you can go through and cut it and make sure that everything lines up. I'm not going to worry too much about it, and I'm just going to sew. Actually, I'll sew along this side so that I can see. Here's the other edge that I don't need. That way I can see my more narrow edge, and I can just sew along this side this way. So just keeping everything lined up. Just going to sew in and then push the needle back out again. So just through like that. There are many different kinds of stitches you can use for this, but this I find is easiest for me. So I've already made my stitch there. What I'm going to do is go back here, stitch in there, and then come out on this side of my thread. So it's kind of like an embroidery stitch, or anyone who likes to sew and embroiders or anything. I'm going to do the same here. So here's my thread, which here I'll maybe add a little soap to it so you can see it a little better. Probably should have used a white thread just to show you guys, but I didn't want the stitching to be too noticeable. Alright, so here's my thread. See it? It's all covered in soap. Alright, so here it is on the side. This is where it came out. I'm going to insert my needle here because here is that other thread. So here's that last stitch that we made. So I'm going to go right in here between the stitch and my thread, and then come out on the other side of my thread. So I'm trying to do this while watching the camera, and it's a little difficult. There we go. And that's all I'm going to do all the way along the edge. So just make sure that you are leaving a little bit of an edge on the side. Okay, let me get this last stitch and I'll show you. So see how we have this little bit of an edge? Make sure you leave this little bit at least. Go all the way along the edge until you reach the top part of your purse. Once you get to the top, go all the way as far up as you can, because then once this is all sewn up, we're going to fold it, and it'll just make it a little bit easier if this is all sewn together. So stitch all along the side till you get to this very top part. Do it on both sides, and then I'll meet you again so that we can work on this top part of the purse. So I know I told you I was going to just sew up to the top, but as I was sewing this along, I thought of a few other things that I should probably let you know. Make your stitches small. The smaller you leave these, you don't want them to be super itty bitty, but make these pretty close together, because when you fold this over, after you've given several stitches, you can test this out. Just with your index finger, just push on the edge here and make sure that this isn't popping open. If you make really big stitches, you're going to have a very open seam, and if you put any kind of weight in this, it's going to pop open. So we don't want it to pop open, because then things are going to get lost inside the little seams. You'll lose, you know, an eyeliner, a chapstick or something, and it's going to be floating around the bottom part of your purse. So we don't really want that to happen. So just make sure you use really small stitches. Another thing that I had thought about was for the folks that need maybe a little bit more help seeing where your stitches are going to go, If you're using a really light fabric and maybe a darker thread or something, it might be easier. But if you're not, if you're trying to hide your thread and you got it the same color as the fabric that you're working on, you can also use a ruler and draw a line with your soap or your chalk. I broke the soap, here we go. So you could just draw a line along the edge, and that way it'll give you a guide for where to sew. So that might be a little helpful tip for anyone if you need it. So, okay, I'm going to continue sewing. You can pause the video if you want to. Go through, sew along both sides of your liner, and I'll see you again here in just a minute. So I finished sewing everything. I went up to the very top on both sides, and I cut off all the little extra bit of fabric I had, along with some of these a few of these little fringes. So now it's time to move on to the purse. So if you want to make a little pocket, I guess, inside of the liner so that you have, you know, a place to put your wallet or your cell phone or something, we're going to need another little bit of fabric. This time I want the pocket to be the darker blue, because when we flip this inside out, here, so this is how it's going to look inside of the purse. So this is what we're going to see when you open the purse. I want my pocket to be a little bit darker so that it's a little easier to see it. So we're going to measure it, our extra bit of fabric, along with our liner, just to make sure that this pocket is going to fit. And I want this to be a big pocket, so I want it to take up most of one of the sides of the liner. So I'm just going to fold it in like so. That's how wide across I want my pocket to be. I have a very large cell phone, so I want to make sure that it fits in the pocket. So you can just hold it up and measure it. I'm using my phone to film, so I can't really measure it right now. But I know I need a really big piece. And then I also need to fold here this bottom part like so. So this is how I want the pocket to look. Just go through and mark it with my soap. So I want it to be about here. I want this to be about here. And I want this to be about here. That way we can cut off any excess fabric that we have. So this one along the edge is where I'll fold these. So these are okay here. This one has this little bit of a piece, and this one has a large piece of excess fabric here. So we're just going to cut this off. Now I'll cut it off along the liner, because we will need a little bit of space, just like we did when we folded the liner on the inside, so that when we sew, there's a little bit of fabric folded over to help support the pocket. So let me cut this little bit off here. And we're going to sew this a little differently than we did the inside of the liner. And here is why. The inside of the liner is hidden, so you won't see all of this stitching. It's going to be on the inside of the purse. So the purse is going to be here, and you won't see it. This will be what you'll see when you open your purse. The pocket, however, will be different, because as we're stitching along the little edges of the pocket to sew it onto our liner, you will be able to see these stitches. So if you want to make them a little more invisible, try to get a thread that's as close to the color of the liner as possible. But if you're using a floral or anything, it might be a little difficult. So for the stitching here, we're going to use we're going to use an actual embroidery stitch. So the other one was somewhat similar. This one, we're going to use an embroidery stitch. It's just easier to create a straight line when you can see your stitching, versus when you're just inserting your needle in and then you pull it out the other side and then you push back in, pull it up this way. That one's a little bit more difficult. However, not so much with the embroidery one. This part is going to require that you pay really close attention. If it's easier for you to sew all of these edges together first, then do that. You can also there's something called hem tape, and you could just stick a little piece of tape on there and hold this down. That might help you as well. But I'm just going to sew it straight onto my liner. So I'm going to fold it like this and just start stitching. So once I line this up in the direction that I wanted it, which was this way, I'm going to fold along the soap line right there. There we go. And if it's easier for you, you can pin it down. So let me grab a couple of pins and I'll get this all pinned down, show you what that would look like once it's pinned. So I went and I got my pins. threw some on a pin cushion, and I'm just going to fold along the edges. Now, something I thought about was when I was in home ec, when I was in like middle school. I used to take home ec, and we did a lot of sewing projects. They used to have the pins that didn't have this little plastic bit. I like this plastic bit when I'm sewing, but if you have the pins that don't have this plastic bit, you can just pin along the edges and then go and sew this with your, iron it with your ironing board and an iron. Iron it down and it'll crease the edges, and that makes it so much easier to sew. Because mine had this little plastic bit, I can't iron it with these on there, but I'll show you how to pin it on anyway, and then I'll remove them and go iron this down and show you what that will look like, because it'll make your life a lot easier to sew this onto your liner if you iron it. So here's our side. I've already folded it over. I'm just going to add a pin like so. Then I'll fold the other side and do the same. You can also put the pins in. So whichever method you prefer. I'll put this on the corner. Be careful with your corners, because you're going to have to fold them in like that. So I'll show you on this one. So once you have your side folded, so we have one side folded, fold the other side over it, but line up your corners. And then I would put a pin right here, like that. And then do the same on this side. So fold it on the line and then fold that there. Make sure that your edges aren't popping out too badly. You don't have any extra fabric coming in on the side here. And we'll do the same on this side. And there we go. Our pocket is all folded and pinned up. I can move this one now that all my corners are pinned. So I'm going to iron this. I'll see you again in just a moment. All right, so I ironed my pocket, and as you can see, it left a really deep crease, which is perfect because now we can take, I was able to take all the pins out, and it just holds its form. So that's going to make it easier to sew the pocket onto our liner. So now, keeping the liner right side out, sure the top part is towards the top, line up your pocket where you want it to go. Now, if your pocket is completely the same size, then pick a side that has a completely folded top part. So what I mean by that is, like, look at this side. So this one's open. So this one would be better to place at the bottom, because that way when you remove items from your pocket, it's not going to continuously get stuck on here and then pop all of this open. So I'm going to line this up right up at the top, line up my pocket how I want it, and then we're going to sew it on. I think earlier in the tutorial I had said something about doing more of an embroidery stitch for this because it was going to be highly visible. That would have been a little too complicated for beginners, so I was hoping to make this as beginner friendly as possible, so I changed my mind. We're going to be doing something a little easier. So to do that, you can do a couple of different things here. You can either pin your pocket down, and that will help it just stay in place, or you can get your soap and then just draw where your pocket's going to go. That way you don't run the risk of pricking your finger while you're sewing. So I'm just going to outline my pocket. That way, as I'm sewing along, if I'm not sewing along my soap line, I know that I have moved my pocket. So, all right, there we go. So I want to hide the knot for my thread. I don't want that to be visible at all. So I'm just going to open this right here, and I'm going to sew through onto the edge right here, onto that crease. So I'll do it here on the corner. So see, my needle has popped out, is on the inside. So I'll just give this one stitch right there, and now my knot's going to be hidden in the inside right in there, and nobody will be able to see it. So that's perfect. So there we go. Okay, so now to start sewing it, let me zoom in. We have to be very careful not to sew through both sides of the liner, otherwise you'll sew your liner shut. So let's turn this over so we have the open part at the bottom. Line up our pocket with our soap line. There we go. And now we're just going to start stitching through both of these. Well, in this case, it's got this little extra bit as well, so make sure that's tucked in. You're just going to sew through the liner. Be careful not to poke yourself, and through the pocket. So see, I've got completely through all of them. Just give that a stitch and then tighten that up. And now we'll go right next to it. You want your stitches to be pretty close together because it also helps support the pocket. So if your stitches are too far apart, you're going to have a very open seam, and it's also not going to support any of the items you put inside the pocket. So make your stitches nice and close together. Go through all of those. And if you notice, I'm not sewing far into the pocket because I don't want these to be too highly visible. If you want them to be very visible, you want them to just stand out because it's part of the design that you want, then you can change the color of the thread, make it something brighter or something that'll stand out against the pocket or the fabric that you're using for the pocket, and then you can go further in as well. You can do like a small stitch and then do a longer stitch, small stitch, longer stitch. That'll create a nice design for it. I'm making this as simple as I can, so I'm just going to use the same color thread or as close to the same color thread as I can just to kind of keep the stitches hidden. But here we go, give it a couple more stitches. And all the while check that your pocket is still lined up with your soap line because it can move from one stitch to the next, so make sure you keep that lined up. And if you see that you're having a really hard time sewing it and keeping everything lined up, you can also use safety pins, which I don't have any handy right now. You can use a couple of safety pins to pin it down as well. So here are a couple of stitches. Zoom out a bit. I'm going to keep stitching this way all the way to the corner, and then in the corner I'll do a stitch on this side, stitch on this side, and then go this direction, and then just go all the way around. Make sure that you don't sew this top part because it is a pocket, so just sew along this edge, and this edge, okay? I'll go all the way to the corner. I'll see you when I get there, and I'll show you how to do this one corner, and then I'll let you finish the rest. Okay, so here we are at the corner, stitched all along the side. Just going to give a stitch right up here on the corner, and then we're going to stitch on this side. So we're going now in the opposite direction. So I'm going to switch over to this side. Also stay as close to the corner as you can. And then I poked my needle through the same stitch where this thread came out. So as close as I could, right there. Go. And there we go, our corner is all sewed up. Just to reinforce that stitch, I'm going to do a second stitch right above the one I just did. There we go. And now I'm going to stitch all the way along this side and then do the same thing for this corner and all the way along this side. So if you need to pause the video, go ahead and pause that for a moment, and I will see you again when we're done. So we have sewn completely around our pocket. Now we just have this top part that we have to leave open. And for this part, if you see this little piece of fabric that we tucked in here, it can get caught on any items you're pulling out of your pocket. So we're going to sew this down. So to do this, I'm going to use a really small stitch. So as you can see, I'm going to have to move a little bit lower because that's where the edge of the fabric is. So if I turn this around, see, it's right where my finger is. That's where it ends. So I'm going to bring my needle closer to where that little piece of fabric ends. I'm just going to do a quick stitch down. There we go. And now we're lined up close to the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to make really small stitches in this section because I don't want them to be really noticeable. So I'm just going to stitch one in here. So now what I mean by a really small stitch, see where our thread comes out? We're just going to insert our needle really close to it. See, and that makes one really tiny little stitch. So I'm just going to insert my needle here through the back as close close-ish to the stitch we just made. So I'm just going to space them out a little bit, but they're still pretty close. I'm going to try to line them up as well. So see, the thread comes out right around here, and we're just going to insert our needle really close to where the thread comes out. We just want this to be a really small stitch. There we go. There's another one. So as you can see, I'm just doing this freehand, but if you want your stitches to be lined up and to look really, really neat, I would grab either your chalk or your soap and just draw a line across the top part of the pocket to use as a guide, so that when you're sewing, you can make all of your stitches line up really neatly, one right next to the other. Then all you really have to worry about is just the size of your stitch, instead of having to think about where it is that you need to make the stitch so that they all line up. But I'm just going to keep stitching this. There you go. As you can see, they're pretty small stitches. So I'll keep working on this until I get to the end of the pocket, and then we can sew the liner onto the purse and we'll be done. So now I have sewn the pocket onto the liner. We're good to go. Now we have to sew the liner into the purse. So flip your liner inside out, and then we're going to fold this top over like this. So I'll show you in case you fold it all the way through. Just fold the top over itself. There we go. And that way all the little fuzzies will be on the inside of the purse and they won't pop out and you won't see them. So measure it up against your purse, because while we've been sewing everything, it could have shifted a little and you might just need to remeasure. So line up your purse, line up your liner with your purse, and if you need to fold it down a little bit more, like I do, just fold it down a bit more so that it fits your purse and you have a little bit of an edge sticking out on top. So now we have to decide where we want the pocket to go. So if I insert my liner this way, my pocket's going to be along the back side of the purse. If you want your liner to, or your pocket, excuse me, to be on the front side of the purse, so along this end, just turn your liner around. Insert your liner into the purse, and then just make sure you push down on all the corners really well, and that you have folded everything over itself. So see, all the folded stuff is between the purse and the liner. So when we sew it on, you won't have any of the fuzzies popping out into the inside of your purse. Line everything up, make sure you can close your purse all right. And now we're going to start sewing along the edge of the purse. So line up your liner so that there's a little bit of an edge coming out. So a little bit of the edge of your purse that peeks out over the liner, and that way your liner will be hidden if you open the purse. Thread, you can pick a thread that's the same color as the liner or one that's the color of the purse. So I don't want my stitching to show, so I grabbed a red thread. So I'm just going to thread my needle and we'll move on. I'm going to start by hiding the little knot in my thread. So I'm just going to stitch into the purse itself so that way my knot, see as I'm pointing my needle up, so that the knot is hidden on the inside of the purse. I'm just going to loop this through just to be sure that it's not going to go through the stitching of the crochet stitching of the purse. And now I'm going to start stitching just in and out. So I'm going to go through the liner since I've already gone through the purse. So I'll go through the liner, and then I'm going to insert my needle through the liner and then through the purse. So through both of them, and then just come back in the other direction. So then go through the purse and then after through the liner. There we go. So I'll make a stitch right next to it. And I'm not going to make tiny stitches, but I'm going to go with a medium-sized stitch so that it's a little noticeable, because I like it when you can see the stitching on the inside of a liner, especially if the thread matches the purse. It just kind of ties it all together. But if you don't want it to be noticeable, just use really tiny stitches. So kind of like what we did at the top of the pocket. So I'm just going to keep stitching here so I can show you what it looks like after you've made a couple of stitches. But here, if you want to reinforce it, because this is a really small purse, so I don't put any heavy items in it. If you've made a really large purse, like see here are my stitches. So just line them up here. To reinforce it, you can make another line of stitching either at the top or under or like below the stitching we're working on now. So right up here along the edge if you want to, or just below. That'll help reinforce it. So if you made a really large purse for it, or your purse project is rather large, you can just reinforce the stitching and not worry about your liner falling off. So I'm going to keep stitching along the edges until I work all the way around, and then just make sure that your end knot is really securely fastened. And something I like to do at the end as well, which I show you in my crochet videos, is weaving in ends. So when I finish a crochet project, I always go through and weave in my ends just to make sure that my work isn't going to become unraveled at any point. I do the same thing when I sew. So once I finish sewing all the way around the edge of the liner, I'm just going to weave in my ends. Since my thread is red, I'll do that on my purse. And there we go. So I've worked all the way around. As you can see, my stitching is lightly noticeable, but it matches my purse. My liner's all set on the inside. I've weaved in my ends. Here is our nifty pocket, which we can fit a cell phone in or a small wallet. And you can also pull in or pull out the liner a little bit. Of course, it's attached to the purse, but if you need to wash it, you can pull out the liner and then just hand wash it and let it out to dry if you ever need to do that. But that is it, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial. If you have any questions, any comments, or any other video suggestions, let me know down in the comments section below. If you want the pattern for the purse that you saw on this video, it is up on the blog. It is free. You can also buy the printable PDF pattern. Everything is on the blog. The link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. I post videos every Thursday. If you want to see more of my work and maybe just a preview or two of what we're going to be doing here on the channel, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. The information is on the screen. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and share the video, and I will see you all again next Thursday.